just some really quick background on, you know, I guess the part of the conversation that this film highlights. So as some of you know, there's been a large conversation in New York City about closing Rikers. Raise your hand if you've even heard about like closed Rikers, or you've heard people chant that somehow. It's funny because like at one point people would say that and everybody in the room would say that would never happen. And I remember that very first meeting in the Closed Rikers campaign where at the time the president of Just Leadership, Glenn Martin, really challenged an entire group of people, about 50 or 60 civic leaders and advocates and even community members and those who come from communities that have been impacted by incarceration. What would a New York City look like without Rikers Island? And people didn't agree. You know, the lawyers would say that would never happen. The advocates say we have to push harder. You know, the folks in the community would say, well, you know, what is that going to look like? Where are we going to put people? And then fast forward a year later, the mayor, through some very expert advocacy, I mean, you know, if you're an organizer, want to be an organizer, it doesn't get no more organizing than getting a gym at the mayor's, getting a subscription to the mayor's gym where he works out at to pressure him to close Rikers, or reacting like within an hour to fly out to Miami because he's having a meeting with his funders. And it's funny how people change their mind when you have a group of 50, 60 people with signs following everywhere you go. And he said close Rikers Island. And the alternative from the plan that came from that, including, you know, highly advised from the Lippman Commission. It was this commission put together, again, by like just thought leaders in New York City thinking about what would it take to get down to a sizable population, specifically 5,000 people, reduction from about 8,500 or so folks that are there now, and then take the rest of those folks and disperse them across the city. And the mayor's plan was to close all 8, entire Rikers Island, close out all 8 jails that are Rikers Island, and then replace them with 4 smaller community-based facilities that include not only detention centers, but also include multi-purpose use spaces where the community has to identify what those spaces look like. And that's kind of like where the conversation is now. You know, there's a land use process going on over the next few months. I want to say May, maybe wrong about the date. But it's time for the community to just chime in and say exactly what they think about the plan. Do they agree? Do they not agree? You know, and I think that wherever you land on the side of this conversation, whether you want to see Rikers closed, with or without jails, whether, you know, however you imagine New York City to look like, I think this film, this film is meant to catalyze that conversation and catapult that conversation. So today I want to screen not only the film, but I also want to invite, you know, 4 members of the St. Francis community to talk about their impacts of incarceration, and also chime in on their own opinion, own personal opinions about what they think about the plan. And then of course open it up for us to have a larger discussion about it. I don't think that there's right or wrong. I think that sometimes the conversation can get a little heated. But if that happens, I'll bring this back on the moderator. Thanks. I want to invite up Steuben Bake.
Can learn to understand you much better if I can get
Steuben, Lázaro, Kevin, and Alyssa, if you're there. So as I mentioned before, I'll ask a few questions and open up to the audience. Really quickly, before I do ask any of these questions, I'll be remiss if I do not give credit to Kayla Torres, who's interning at my organization to help me compile these questions. So thank you for that. So basically, if you can just go down the line, and basically if you can take, you know, like a few moments to introduce yourself, and then also give your reaction to the film. Anyone can start. I think all the mics are hot. Hello? Oh, you want to be turned on.
I thought they were hot. So good evening, everyone. As Johnny said, my name is Steuben Vega, and I'm a program director for the Osborne Association. And the Osborne Association is an organization that provides services to people with criminal justice involvement. So that's anybody that's on parole, probation, whether state, city, federal levels. I work with that population of people. And in my role, aside from trying to manage staff to see to it that services are being delivered effectively, the idea is to help promote economic stability by making a lot of these men employable, helping them to understand what it's like to put together a good resume, how to engage employees in ways that make them feel comfortable with wanting to hire them after returning back into the community after incarceration. And there's also a component that deals with parenting, just understanding what the family reunification process is like after coming home from incarceration. So that's kind of like what I do.
Good evening. My name is Lázaro Lugo. I'm a student here at St. Francis. I'm also a returning citizen. I'm presently employed full-time as a social worker in social services field. I completed a period of 21 years of incarceration, and I was in Rikers Island probably at the peak of the violent history of Rikers Island. When I was in Rikers Island, it was a madhouse. And so, in reference to the question that Johnny asked, how did I feel about the film? I think the film really brought back a lot of memory that I think I've suppressed since I've returned home, things that I tried to forget on purpose. Some of the reality of what I first felt when I was a 19-year-old kid and walked into that place and felt like if I even was gonna make it out, there was like no humanism, no warmth, just cold. So the film, I think, is setting out to do something that's very good for the community, and is speaking for those that don't have a voice and really don't know how to express what they went through while they were there, or are still going through to this day.
Hello. Hi, I'm Allie. I'm also a student here, obviously. I'm a criminal justice major. You know, what I want to do is I kind of want to like learn the criminal justice system from the other side, so I can hopefully do some kind of like advocacy work as well. You know, follow in the footsteps of everyone here. What else to say? I mean, the video, I spent a lot of time at Rikers, so I do have a lot to say about the video. I mean, they have great ideas, good points, you know. Will it be as easy to implement these ideas and things like that? Probably not, no, I don't think so. But I hope that we can do something to change it, because it is probably worse than what they even describe it in the video, so imagine it, yeah. So, okay, that's all.
Thanks. Good evening, my name is Kevin Smith. I'm a criminal justice major here at St. Francis College. I'm a credible messenger and youth advocate. I work for a company called Shelter in Arms Children and Family Services, where I provide services to youth 16 to 24 while on probation. I'm also a youth counselor at another facility for runaway homeless youth. The film captures, I believe, the essence of what I characterize as societal ills that affects and infects not only the youth and young adults, but the communities as a whole. And it was one of my motivations to become a criminal justice major, and I'm grateful for the opportunity that St. Francis has provided, because now I can help be a part of the culture of making change.
And Suban, I realized you didn't give your reaction to the film. I want to.
Yeah, thank you. After I was hearing him, I was like, oh, I missed that. So, like Lugo, I'm also a returning citizen. I was in Rikers about 22 years ago for at least 3 years. And Johnny said something in the beginning about how he did not foresee this even being possible. You know, and I was one that I would say the same thing. I second that. I would not have thought that we would have made the type of progress that we've made today, as far as, you know, reducing, you know, the prison population and actually closing down Rikers. And so for me, it's just a good feeling to know what that experience was like for me when I was there to what it's becoming today. The fact that they really dismantling this process and trying to make it a little more humane and focusing on the culture, because that's a big deal. You know, the way the culture is in there, it's not that welcoming. You may have certain spaces that might be okay, but for the most part, the overall culture and attitude in there is a lot of hostility and stuff. So, so I'm just kind of happy to see that we're making some progress towards some positive change.
It's funny, you talked about culture, you mentioned culture, in, I want to say 2017, I wrote an op-ed for the Daily News that spoke specifically to that, right? This notion of like, we're taking all of the CEOs from Rikers and putting them in a whole nother facility. Are we really impacting culture? So I think I would ask all of you, or maybe two of you or three of you to chime in and talk about like, do you think that the plan goes far enough to impact culture, and is it enough to change the architecture and the placement of guards to impact culture? What is your thinking about that? Anyone?
First, I'd just like to say that there are men and women responsible for overseeing us, individuals who are in the system, right? When I was in the system, I came in, and my first contact with the correctional officer just created a sense of nervousness, anxiety, distrust, everything contrary to what that uniform is supposed to represent. But that doesn't mean that every officer was this way. It was just a sad reality that the culture, once again, determined the behavior of the correctional officer. You couldn't be humane to inmates or detainees because you were a prisoner lover, or you get labeled, and as a result, there's a sense of uncomfortability that comes with you just coming to work from your peers. So with that being said, I think that in order for the culture to really change, you definitely have to change the mindset and the heart of the people that are responsible for watching over us. There's a saying in a great book that I read some time ago that says, the keepers of the kept are the lowliest of the low. And as far-fetched as that may seem, it is only when you live in that environment that you really get to see how true that is. And it's sad because everybody gets painted with that same brush. Although there are many corrections officers who are very good human beings, and if it were up to them, would work towards changing the world in a better place. But because of the pressure that they have, they can't create that environment.
Can we get one more person here to respond to that?
All right, I'll say something. So for correction officers in Rikers Island, I can say that, in all honesty, they have to be like just as bad as the inmates, probably worse at some points, because also like the correction officers there, they're not even qualified to even be correction officers. They come from the same areas that the inmates come from. They have backgrounds that are not even acceptable that shouldn't even have passed to be correction officers. And yes, there are some good ones, but the majority of them are actually pretty bad. They're horrible. They are. They act worse than inmates, and they actually help provoke it. They help create this culture of violence, and just the whole atmosphere it's not okay. It's because of them. And so maybe if we do move into little, community-based jails, that would be great. But also, I don't think you should just bring all the correction officers to each place. I think that they need to really do a better screening process, maybe. And I mean, something to make it a little bit better, because you can't really change. I know you could change the environment, but to change a mindset that quickly would be difficult. We're all set in our ways. So that's what I have to say.
Hold on, Kevin. I want to move on this week. So
that's really great, really great points. I think about, as mentioned in the film, I did 13 years straight, and I think about meeting that CO on that first day on the job, right? Or even the first time we've encountered, and then running into that same correction officer, like you run into him in Attica, for example, but then run into him again at a place like, I don't know, Sing Sing, or maybe that's on Eastern, right? And they're like, wow, you used to be the biggest fill in the blank over here 3 months ago, but now here you're just like really laid back. But I want to switch to architecture, right? And Kevin, you can lead us off about talking about the impact, whether the positive impact, or what positive impact or negative impact did architecture have on you emotionally, physically, spiritually, one or all, you know, during your incarceration. In other words, like what's the power of architecture, you know, on a person when they're doing time?
All right. Yeah, thank you, John. What I wanted to lead with, obviously, I was also a youth impacted by the criminal justice system. And I think 19 seems to be that magic number, because I entered in 1991 when Rikers was busting at its seams with young black and brown inner city youth who, you know, by mere actions or criminalized behaviors found themselves on Rikers. But I want to paraphrase Tchaikovsky, who says you can judge a society by entering its prisons, and that, you know, speaks to the correctional officers. They became who they became before they entered the prison. That's who they were. So that's where I think an inroad should be. As far as the design, it's interesting because growing up in public school, you would have that smell of hot dog and tater tots and sour milk, lunch boxes.
Still remember.
Yeah, you know, you can walk down the hallways and see little crude cartoonish characters and paintings on the walls. You see the safety officers in the stairwells. And then you find yourself, whether it's on Rikers or in state prison, it kind of captures that, where you see guards, it's no longer safety officers, but it's guards, big burly officers at the housing unit doorways. You still smell the mess hall, no matter where you enter the prison, because they're cooking for hundreds of inmates several times a day. So it permeates the jail, the smell of food. And on the walls, you see those cartoonish paintings done by prisoners. So they have the school to prison pipeline comes to mind when we think about that. So yes, Johnny, the design of the prison does have an effect, because we are not meant to be housed. And in the previous design, you're like sardines stuffed in cells. Now two to a cell in a lot of prisons now. So it does play on the psyche. So it's no wonder one would act out or doesn't need too much provocation to act out, because there's stuff, the jail is bursting, the medical is inadequate, the food is inadequate, and you're frustrated.
So Kevin, I want to thank you for that. I want to bring it over to Stuben. I know you've actually been more to a number of facilities, but kind of sending a question to you. How can the architecture of a facility impact the people within that facility? We have one more question and we'll open it up.
So, for me, it means a lot, and I'm gonna just show you just how much it meant to me. I sat in the chairs. I watched this film today for the first time, and when I started to see how the architecture was, the fact that they had all this sunlight coming in, and like Kevin was talking about how dark it is, you know, the color of the paint, the steel, you know, of what, you know, we was accustomed to seeing, and probably still, I haven't been inside in so long, but I still work in it periodically. But just looking at the design, the way they had it, was a little refreshing to me. You know, the way that they introduced the stuff about recreation, more recreational activities in specific areas. You know, the way it was, it still is to some extent in Rikers Island, everybody's lumped into one space. And so, you know, when you have all of this, these different personalities and attitudes, it's like, you know, like they say the city, like the melting pot. So you have a lot of different things going on. And then we speak again about the culture and the differences about, the mentalities. Like for me, the design is really important. I really like the title of the film, right? I really like the title. And I guess previously said I do see some progress in this. But I think the design is very important because you want to make it a little more humane. And not just like cages where, just people just residing in, have a little more freedom, a little more liberty to move in and out. And another big deal is being able to interact with the officers and having the officers interact back. Because there's a separatism between both sides. You have the inmate, which is the population, and then you have the officers. So, we sometimes call it two gangs, because the officers, they're their own gang, and I'm not speaking for everyone. But there are many that subscribe to that because, again, like Lugo was speaking about, they don't want to be labeled as inmate friendly and things like that because then they also become ostracized amongst their, their peers. But for me, just to answer the question for Johnny, that the culture is very important, and in the film, a woman was talking about how you have to make it more engaging so that, and even the gentleman said how we need to make them feel comfortable in their behavior in there and make it a little more compatible to what we expect them to display out in the community. So I think the design plays a part in that process.
Yeah, thank you for that. One quick question before we open it to the audience, and a few things that folks should know. When the idea that like you hear a lot, sometimes people think that correctional officers are going to lose their jobs, right? You close down this facility, like where the COs going to get their jobs? And what folks fail to realize is that correctional officers on Rikers actually have a high turnover rate, so no one really needs to get fired. You sort of like you lose folks by attrition by just hiring anymore. Because I know that's a huge concern from like the union and the head of COBA, also bringing that up. This other notion around, you brought up the idea of like, we're talking about architecture and the importance of like having sunlight. A lot of you know I work on like issues of solitary confinement and I serve time myself, and I always think about the importance of being in the cell with sunlight and fresh air, or sometimes I get so hot in the winter and things like that, or the fact that I still wear glasses today and not for show. But the fact that I was sitting in a cell for like years at a time and could not see no more than 6 feet in front of them for years at a time. And how does that impact a person's, visual capacity, if you will. Even the slot, the way that you're fed, a lot of different cells, you're fed through the slot on the door. And if you're tall, like many of us on the panel, you literally have to bend at the waist to get your food or to talk to somebody, or if you're getting your blood drawn. I remember getting on my knees to have my blood drawn through the slot. And you talked about making it a little bit more humanizing. I would say let's make it a whole lot more humanizing, because we know that there's possibilities, places in Germany, for example, right? That don't have any fences. There's places in India where police officers don't even have handcuffs. Like what does that look like in work like? In Germany, actually, some of my colleagues, I do some work with the Vera Institute of Justice on the Safe Alternatives to Segregation Initiative. And they travel overseas to look at different departments around the world to see, corrections departments around the world to see what's working. And in Sweden, they reduced violence. And one of the questions that the correctional officers asked the other correctional officers that were there was, how did you guys reduce violence? And funny enough, Germany reduced violence by strengthening the relationships between the people that are doing time and the guards, because they found that incarceration also impacts guards. You think about broken beer bottles in parking lots. What does that look like? And things like that. And correctional officers, high mortality rates and rates of alcoholism. You begin to understand that incarceration is so insidious that although it directs the people who are impacted directly inside the cell, it also chips at the human spirit of the people that are working there. Imagine taking on a job where every other day you come in, you gotta put a needle in somebody and kill them. If you work in Texas, what's your breakfast taste like that morning? So it does chip at the human spirit of the people that are also working there, and also the men and women and even children who are incarcerated inside of these cells. So the last question that I'm going to ask and really open up, if you can just spend maybe 1 or no more than 2 minutes apiece, because I do want to hear from all of you, especially from this. I think is important to have. I'm glad that you're here because you can give a woman's perspective. So Wesley Keynes in the film, he said reentry should begin when the handcuffs are placed on someone, right? So my question is, how do you think that How do you think that the ability to design a new facility within the borough-based jail, within the boroughs, will be able to impact reentry and issues that people face during reentry? So let me say one more time, like, you said reentry starts the minute that you're handcuffed. Whether you agree or not, we know what reentry is like. How do you think that closing Rikers and creating these smaller borough-based facilities will impact reentry, if at all, in your opinion? And if so, how? And maybe you can lean on your own personal experience, thinking about the needs that maybe you needed when you came out. Anyone can take that.
All right, well, I guess I'll go based off of the film. I mean, they made a good point about, like, community-based jails being, like, close to courthouses. That's a really genius idea, because it is.
Who knew, right?
Yeah, right, exactly, because that definitely will make it a lot easier, like, for people to go to court, It was a really tough thing going to court. It was probably, like they said in the film, the worst. Like, everybody dreaded court. You didn't want to go, but you had to. A lot of the times you would go there and not even be seen. It was dreadful. So that's a good idea. That would definitely work. Also, like, being, I guess, close to your family, because I know that, like, a lot of people wouldn't come visit me because of the fact that I'm all the way on an island, across a bridge that nobody can get to. Nobody wants to take the bus. Nobody has time to do all that. So, like, being in the community would be a lot easier for people to, keep those ties with your families, keep those ties so that you're more connected with the outside world, so that when you come out, you're not just, like, shocked or, like, anything, you're not hit blindsided by anything. Like, you're close with your family, so that would have been helpful too for me. What else? I mean, to be honest, I don't know, like, in all honesty, I don't know how well, I don't know how it's gonna work. I don't think any of us really know how well it's gonna work or what effect it would have, but those are the only two things that I could think of right now that would be positive, that would work. So, what else? Did I answer that? I got lost.
Thanks, Abigail.
So yeah, I think it's a great design, a great opportunity, because one of the main goals of corrections, as Ali touched on, is to strengthen family ties. So by keeping the prisons closer to the communities in which the offense occurred, it's a start. But then they have to deal with those who really don't have strong family ties at the beginning. How do you factor that in? So it takes just a little bit more aspects to look at just with putting the jails in the community, it's that family dynamic that's already crushed. There's a lot of relationships that's already broken. So again, to strengthen the family ties to those who don't have it in the first place, I think that takes a topic of discussion as well.
So, should reentry begin when they put the handcuffs on you?
That wasn't the question, but that's what he said.
Pretty much, that's what he's saying, that it should begin at that point. You shouldn't wait to the end of somebody's period of incarceration to start addressing those issues. For me, I was in jail before I went to jail. I was in prison before I was put in prison. I stopped believing in myself. I had low self-worth. I wanted to cut corners. I lost hope. And as a result of all of that, I was able to perpetuate the behavior that eventually put me in jail. When a person goes into jail, I know the first feelings that I had was, how do I survive? How do I conform to what's before me in order for me to make it through? And I believe that this system that they're creating could work and be very effective, because if you can boost someone's self-esteem, if you can get them to believe in themselves and not feel like they have to turn into someone else, then I think that they can begin to address issues in an environment that's cultivating and supportive. in that sense, I think, you know, the last time I was in Rikers Island, I seen a sign that said they tried to kill us by burying us, but they didn't realize that we were seeds. And so you're caught in a storm when you go to jail, and it's just rains and all these other things that are coming upon you, and here it is, a little bit of sunlight on your skin means the world to you, because you feel some sense of liberation. So I think the design itself, the space, giving everybody their own individual space, because for most people out here, they don't really, most people in the community don't understand what space is. But when you put in an environment like that, you come to realize real quick just how important it is to people, and how somebody will slash your face literally with a razor if you get too close to them. Who wants to live that way?
Thanks, sir.
So I believe that, I agree with Wes, I believe that reentry should start at the very beginning. And the reason why I say that is because there are some people who manage to beat their cases, you know, because of technicalities and different things of that nature. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're ready to come back to the community. And so if we're gonna start rebuilding these people and making them what I like to call community ready, I think it needs to start then. So one of the differences, and you know, because you probably never been through this experience, don't understand, when you go into Rikers, unlike when you go upstate, you meet a counselor, you get assessed for a lot of different things, like what your reading level is like, you know, a lot of different social factors about families and stuff. But when you go to Rikers, that's not something that happens. You don't meet a counselor there. They don't know what your circumstances really are. And so that's why, for me, it's very important that it starts there, because of the portion of people who never get to go upstate could perhaps take a plea agreement that is a time served and they get released from Rikers Island. So for me, it's important that the reentry process starts then and there for those reasons. And then I want to say, Lugo spoke about the importance, like, you know, about the space and the light. Now, I just want to say this about that, is that I stood in Rikers Island 3 years before I went upstate to do my term in prison, all right? Because in the jails, there's just the jails. The prisons is upstate. The first month that I was there, I literally, because I didn't have any sunlight. The recreation was called at 6:30 in the morning, and you get an hour rec. There's no sun that you receive outside. So when I went upstate to prison in the month of May, in that first month, I was probably as dark as Kevin on that end, or darker, you know? I mean, it was because I've been deprived so much of the sun that my skin absorbed it to the point where I was so dark. That's how bad my skin had been deprived of the sunlight. And I just want to say something about Johnny. You said something that was really interesting, and it made me think about what happens when, you know, the stuff that they say about correction officers maybe lose their jobs if the prison population gets smaller. So immediately I'm processing it, you know, I mean, because I'm a social work major. I started as a criminal justice major, but my major now is social work, and I'm always looking for things, you know, to make a difference, right? And so right away I thought, how could we make a difference and address something like that? So right away I thought, well, if you look at the parole officers today, a lot of them are overwhelmed with caseloads that are like so many people that when you go to meet with them, they only see you for a few minutes and they're gone. They really don't get to know you on a more personal level. So I'm thinking if maybe because of the merger with DOCS, right, the New York State Corrections Department, and community supervision with the merger, some of those correction officers can take on the roles of parole officers, and we can have, you know, caseloads lessen, more quality of services delivered from that portion of, you know, I mean, with so much law enforcement, but from that, you know, from that side of the spectrum. And I think that there we can begin to develop another relationship building and making a lot of our returning citizens community ready.
Thank you. Thanks, y'all. Can we give them a hand of applause, please? So we have about 10 to 15 minutes for questions. I think, yeah.
Hi, in the late 1990s, I worked for the Second Opportunity Schools, which was a combination of New York City and community-based organizations. If you panelists had the choice of who would run these new neighborhood jails, Would it be the city? Would it be completely privatization? Would it be a combination of one of those two and community-based organizations, or something else, and why? Thank you.
So like two people can answer that, that way we can answer it.
Thank you for the question. Great question. I would humbly submit that it should be a board, a civilian-led board, or representatives of someone from the clergy, a business owner, a home owner, and perhaps someone from the school, the PTA president or something. I think they should have a seat on some council or board to help in this new Justice by Design scheme. Well,
So I'll add real quick that there is something like that. So every neighborhood has what's called a neighborhood advisory council, if you will. And it's comprised, excuse me?
Community board?
I can't hear you.
A community board?
Well, no, this is something different. It involves folks that may be involved in the community board, folks from the community. Because the idea, as I mentioned, like in the film, is like to have the community chime in and say exactly what it is that that how they want to see that facility operate, what's in there, who's in there. As far as the process, how it's elected, I'm not sure. To be honest with you, I'm not sure how folks get picked and identified. I do know that everyone on that advisory council comes from that very same community. And just so folks know, there's going to be a number of hearings coming up as the city actually looks at like land usage and all that stuff. They really do need to hear from people in the communities to ask those exact questions, because you have a group of folks who are saying, well, why should we even have DOC run it in the first place? We can have someone completely different, and that's a completely valid argument, you know, which a lot of folks are making, to really reimagine the entire thing. So to the extent that you can attend, I totally suggest you attend. Any other questions? John?
Great panel, excellent, issues, and I want to commend you guys who did time over there and come out and, pursuing a school career. But my question, we're talking about Rikers Island. In your views, what are the prevent things in the community that would help young kids like you guys were, not to go to Rikers in the first place? Because we hear about a lot of resources that is taken out from the cities, especially in the 90s, early 90s. What are the things that you guys can think of that would help the kids not going to jail in the first place?
Well, so I graduated from a juvenile detention center, so I technically was in the system already, but I didn't go, I went to Rikers afterwards, shortly after, like less than a year after I left the detention center. No, about a year after I left.
How old were you, just for context, how old were you?
Okay, I left when I was 18, and then I returned, I went to Rikers when I was 19. So during that time, I wanted to go to school, I wanted to go to college. The problem was that I didn't have any help afterwards. I was kind of just stuck in limbo. There was no help for me to go to school. Okay, I graduated. Okay, that's fine. Now, how do I get to college? How do I continue further my education? Also, another problem is that the place was shut down because a girl died there, and there was they didn't know what happened, so they shut the place down, and legislative never made a decision on what to do with the records, so I couldn't even access my records stating that I had a high school diploma or that I was able to graduate. So that was another issue. So and I was going through that for a year. Then I got locked up again because I had no direction, just frustration. I didn't know how to get to school, and I had no help, so I got locked up again. And then I returned again. I was home again when I was 21. I got locked up again because of the fact that I still could not reach my records. I still had no help to go to school. It took up until the last time I just recently came out when I was 24. Yeah, time flies. So for me to actually be able to, 3 times it took me to be locked up in there for me to find some way or some kind of help afterwards to go to school. Now I'm in school, here I am, very happy, doing what I have to do. There's nothing that will make me want to go back or ever do anything to go back because I'm so focused, and now here I am. So I would have to say that school is really important. Help guiding people to go to school is really important, because the hard part is getting into school, you know. It gets easier as it goes along, but getting into school is hard. So, school, that is my answer.
Thank you.
In reference to your question, there are a lot of organizations that are actually working towards that end, that have alternatives to incarceration for young people. Thankfully, there are organization that Mr. Steuben works with, he's director of, organization that Kevin Smith works with. At the end, I think I would say that all young people want to do is be understood, be loved, be supported. And so as long as those factors are there, I think younger people can really thrive and not feel like they need to do things, unnecessary things, to get the attention that they're seeking.
He's got the mic right here.
One thing that really caught my attention in this film was basically what was said was people going into Rikers were coming out worse than they were going in. So I want to ask, based on your experience, especially the gentleman that went in during the highest point of population at Rikers, would you say that you felt more violent because of the atmosphere that you were in while in Rikers Island? And also a secondary question would be, would you feel like if the environment was a lot more humane, would you say that the re-entry rate would not be as high?
Thanks for the question. Quickly, I served over 8,000 consecutive days of incarceration. 8,395 to be more precise. That's 23 years.
How many?
23 years. Over 4,000 was in segregation. Unfortunately, I wouldn't call it fortunate, I was housed in every maximum security prison in the state of New York. I was in the jail of every jail. That's the box, solitary confinement. So, but no, for me, and I'm not atypical, there are many of us who never went in. See, physically I was bound, but mentally and spiritually, again, I was freer than most. So I made choices in my life. And it goes back to the previous question that the brother asked. I think it's resources. If resources, and what Ali said, education opportunities are provided, a lot of people want to go to Rikers. But no, I don't think it makes you worse. It depends on what's in the person, what influences the person place value on will determine if he's going to go in and come out worse, right? Or go in good or vice versa.
Can I have Steuben chime in on that as far as, like, I hear what your question is, and I would ask it a little bit differently about, like, you know, did the presence of violence influence how you do your time? You know, and if so, necessarily how? Was it for the better or for the worse? You know, one of the experiences that I had, and this is like just talking about my experience, is like, you know, like, again, like the CO saying, hey man, like, I hear you, but you need to go get a knife like everybody else. And like, I never held a knife before I went to prison. You know, and I got arrested for robbery, so obviously I held a gun, but I didn't hold a knife, and I'm not comparing, but I never had to hold a knife because in my mind, that's a different kind of, I mean, we could talk about differences what it takes to hold a knife versus a gun, but I had never held a knife until I was incarcerated. So when I mentioned in the film about having a proclivity for violence now, that this is my home now, I spent 10 years here, and if everybody got a knife, I'm not gonna be the only one without a knife. So like, how does that impact, like how does that, you know, what does that do, you know, impact how the decisions that we make on a daily basis during time? Or more importantly, for those of us who did more than 10 years, right, and not to put a number on it, but when you handle those decisions like that, right, with violence, with aggression throughout the years, what does that look like on the outside when you have to, when somebody stepped on your shoes and they didn't say excuse me and you don't got your knife? You know, and that kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, thanks. And for me, again, I just told you I was in every maximum security prison. They don't just give you a ticket, hey, you're going somewhere. Most of the transfers are punitive. And I did almost 12 years in lockdown, so I wasn't a saint, you know. There was violence. But it's, again, like a friend of mine would say, if I was a cub and you put me in a field of lions, I'm either going to be prey or I'm going to be a cub that has to turn into a monster, right? So we do things we're not proud of, but survival kicks in. So yes, but I chose on this side to move in a positive light, you know. And at that time, faced with the violent circumstances and the violent nature of prison, yes, you either fight. Ain't no running. Ain't no running in prison. You know, you're predator or prey. And I don't want to glamorize that side. You know, that was behind me, but it does have effect. It has a lasting effect. But it just comes back to choice, you know.
So I'm asking you to just chime in real quick, 1 minute, and then we'll take one more question, and then we'll close it out as I do want to respect people's time. I think we're just going to start. Thank you for that.
So for me, initially, the culture of violence that festered inside the prison was something that I subscribed to. I went in gang affiliated. I had a really big position in my gang affiliation where I was really influential with hundreds of people under me that I was easily to be able to send orders to do things. And I never really used that though, but that culture that I was a part of at the time did influence my behavior for the earlier portion of my incarceration, at least the first 3 or 4 years, at least up until 5 of those years. And it didn't bring me anything good. It was a lot of consequences that I had to deal with, you know, like how Kevin spoke about being in special housing units or keep lock, those type of conditions. But one thing that was always different about me is that even when I committed my offense, I knew that when I was committing the crime, what I was doing was wrong. The difference back then from the way I thought about things then to who I am today was that today I respect the consequences. Before I didn't. So when you're thinking criminally, you know, you're thinking about just doing things and you're just thinking about getting away with it. You're not really trying to think about the consequences, because it's the consequences itself that may deter you from committing the crime. So I would always look to ignore that. But after being confined at one point for being in violation of the prison rules, I had time to really do some introspection, and I was looking at how many more years I still had ahead of me in my sentence, and I knew I had to stop. I had to change this process for myself, because it really wasn't me. You know, I was just being a part of that culture, and so I was able to take ownership and accountability for myself, and I was able to start doing the right things. So to go to like Johnny's question about how did that culture, you know, have an impact on me, and I can only speak for me on that. I know I can say some things about others, but I like to just speak about myself. It had its grip on me initially, but once I was able to get comfortable within myself and to make those decisions, like to leave my gang affiliation without the concern of the consequences, because back then it was you leave this gang and there's consequences. So I had to take those chances, those risks. And so I did it at all costs, and I just continued to program and to do things to be able to prepare for my reentry. I knew that I was going to be dealing with people, you know, competing for jobs with people who didn't have these backgrounds, and that had these college educations, and here I was coming back out to the community with none of those things. So I knew I had to balance the playing field, like Johnny said, so to speak. So I took ownership of that, and I didn't let that affect me when I returned back to the community. And one other thing that I had over a lot of people is that I had family support. So I had people there that was able to support me in the process. So yeah, so that was that, Johnny.
Yeah, I'm actually not going to take another question, but folks can maybe hang around an extra 5 minutes. You can ask them questions individually. I'm so sorry. So go ahead, ask it, big brother. Go ahead, ask it, because I hate to. Go ahead, ask it.
No, it's cool. I'll go up there and ask.
Okay, you had your shot. Just as a closing thought, you know, like when I first got involved with the Close Rikers campaign, it was real easy, right? Like, hey, let's close the jail. I did 13 years. Of course, I want to close the jail. You know, and then the campaign evolved into like really what it is now, right? And, you know, as an abolitionist, I had to ask myself, you know, can I support a plan that involves the creation of a facility that, you know, is going to potentially lock up my own people, black and brown folks, and this is something I really like something real for me. You know, not only as a man of color, but also a man that's been impacted by the same system, and who's also a leader within amongst my peers who are also directly impacted. And I think one of the deciding factors, because I obviously agree with the plan. With what I'm not mentioning there is that there's a lot of different clauses that I would hope that come across with my agreement, a lot of disclaimers in a sense. But overall, it's a complete detraction or shrinkage of the entire incarceration population in New York City. You know, we literally are going from a capacity of holding up to 22,000 people in this city to a place where we're holding no more than like 6,000 people locked up in our jails. And because I'm an abolitionist, I'm going to come back and try to shut down those 4 too. But in the meantime, let's get from a place where there's 12, you know, 12 to 8, I should say, 12 to 8, and then we'll come back for the rest of that. But that was one of the determining factors that really did it for me. So in the coming months, there's going to be a lot of conversations. This Wednesday, we'll be at the SVA Theater, which I think the capacity is like 1,000 people, and it's already sold out. What is it, less than that, 800?
425.
Oh man, I thought it was 1,000. Who told me 1,000? Where did I get that number from? It feels like you're 1,000 when you're up on that stage. But I know that it's sold out. Did I get that part right?
It's sold out.
And we have how many screenings? Because I don't want to say numbers. How many screenings scheduled?
Over a dozen, and then we have like over a dozen cooking.
Great. So just like, you know, a special thanks definitely to PS Public Square Media. The first film they filmed was actually Rikers in American Jail, and this is sort of like the part 2, and we screened that film here. Of course, I will be remiss, St. Francis community in the post-prison program specifically for your leadership and your tenacity to continue bringing these conversations into these spaces. And of course, you know, to my fellow alumni and like folks, man, y'all really like doing a damn thing here, and I want to continue supporting you in the work that's going on here. Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, John. And just real quick, if you guys want to learn more about this, follow us at Rikers Film on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And if you want to learn more about the film or host a screening, come see me. I'll give you my card.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.